The universe, in its infinite complexity and occasional bursts of cosmic irony, had developed a rather peculiar consensus about humanity. Across 17 different star systems, through 42 distinct civilizations, and among countless species who had collectively forgotten more about physics than Earth's greatest minds would ever learn, there existed one unifying belief. Humans were ridiculous, not dangerous, not innovative, not even particularly interesting. Just ridiculous? The Collective Observation Initiative, because aliens loved bureaucratic names almost as much as they loved unnecessary meetings, had been monitoring Earth for approximately 237 years. Their files on humanity read like a comedy of errors written by someone who fundamentally misunderstood how natural selection worked. Humans ate poison for fun and called it spicy food. They voluntarily threw themselves out of perfectly functional aircraft for recreation. They had somehow weaponized the act of sitting still until their bodies forgot how to process sugar correctly. The galaxy had watched, utterly baffled, as these bizarre primates went from horse-drawn carriages to splitting atoms in roughly a century, all while maintaining the common sense of a concussed lemming. The monitoring protocols were extensive. Satellite interference disguised as solar flares, observation posts hidden in the asteroid belt, quantum sensors embedded in Earth's communication infrastructure. Every major city, every military installation, every university campus existed under a blanket of surveillance so comprehensive that the watching aliens could probably file humanity's taxes more accurately than humans could themselves. Oak Ridge University, nestled in the northeastern corridor of what humans optimistically called civilization, represented a particularly ironic monitoring challenge. Universities were where young humans supposedly learned to think critically, which the aliens found adorable in the way one might find a puppy trying to solve calculus adorable. The campus sprawled across 200 acres of architectural inconsistency, Gothic revival buildings squatting next to concrete, brutalist nightmares, all connected by pathways that suggested the original campus planner had been deeply drunk or possibly concussed. The engineering building, Maxwell Hall, stood at the campus's eastern edge like a monument to humanity's bizarre relationship with aesthetics. Someone had apparently decided that the best design for a structure housing the university's brightest technical minds was Soviet-era parking garage meets depression. 5 stories of gray concrete and narrow windows. It looked less like a place of learning and more like where hope went to file paperwork before dying. It was 6:47 p.m. on a Thursday, which meant most of the building had emptied out. The autumn sun hung low and angry on the horizon, painting everything in shades of orange that would have been beautiful if anyone had been paying attention to anything besides their phones, their problems, or their petty campus politics. Our protagonist, let's call her Reeves, Mira Reeves, because apparently parents in the 2000s thought naming their children after the Matrix characters showed personality, was precisely the kind of student who made alien observers update their human durability files with increasing frequency. 22 years old, third-year mechanical engineering major, surviving on a diet that consisted primarily of coffee, Spite, and whatever could be microwaved in under 3 minutes. She stood 5'6" in her perpetually untied work boots, with dark hair usually contained in what optimists might call a bun, and realists would call a structural failure held together by a pencil. She had just finished a 3-hour laboratory session on fluid dynamics, which was exactly as thrilling as it sounded, and was currently navigating the hallway toward the building's eastern exit, while mentally calculating whether she had enough time to grab dinner before her circuit design assignment consumed the rest of her evening. The answer was no. But humans were eternal optimists about time management, which the aliens found both endearing and deeply stupid. The hallway lights flickered, a combination of aging electrical systems and budget cuts that had become so routine that nobody even noticed anymore. Reeves's backpack, loaded with approximately 40 pounds of textbooks that she kept insisting she would actually read, dug into her shoulders as she turned the corner past the vending machines that had been temporarily out of order since September. She didn't immediately notice the group waiting by the eastern stairwell. Why would she? Her mind was busy calculating pressure differentials and wondering if the cafeteria still had anything edible, or if she was facing another night of instant ramen and existential dread. The group noticed her, though. 5 of them, clustered with the casual menace of people who had decided that physical intimidation was an acceptable substitute for personality. 3 guys, 2 girls, all wearing the kind of expensive athletic wear that screamed, "My parents' money insulates me from consequences." They were students from the business college, which everyone in engineering regarded with the same wariness one might reserve for a suspicious mushroom. Probably harmless, potentially toxic, definitely not worth the risk. The conflict had been brewing for weeks. Something about a group project, accusations of stolen research, and the kind of petty academic drama that made reality television look sophisticated. Reeves had been tangentially involved. Her code had been used, allegedly without permission, in someone else's entrepreneurship pitch. She had explained, repeatedly and with increasing irritation, that the code was open source and available to anyone with basic search engine skills. But apparently facts were optional when wounded egos were involved. Hey, the lead guy, card or something, trust fund haircut, jaw that suggested his family tree had some concerning branches, stepped forward with the swagger of someone who had never actually been punched in the face. "We need to talk." Reeves stopped, sighed with the weariness of someone whose capacity for bullshit had reached its daily limit approximately 6 hours ago, and adjusted her backpack straps. "No, we really don't. You made us look stupid in front of Professor Hendricks." "I didn't have to make you look stupid," Reeves replied, her tone suggesting that exhaustion had finally killed whatever diplomatic filter she might have once possessed. "You managed that entirely on your own by not understanding how GitHub works." In the Maxwell Hall security office, exactly 347 feet from this increasingly tense confrontation, 6 different camera feeds showed the scene with crystal clarity. The security guard on duty, a guy named Thomas, who was currently more interested in his sandwich than his monitors, had the volume turned down on his desk speakers. Standard Thursday evening. Students being dramatic. Nothing unusual. 342,000 miles away, in a monitoring vessel that technically didn't exist and definitely wasn't hiding behind lunar orbit, the scene was generating significantly more interest. The observation post designated Station Theta 7 looked less like a spaceship and more like what would happen if someone gave an anxiety disorder physical form and unlimited budget. Screens covered every available surface, displaying everything from traffic patterns in Mumbai to agricultural reports from Iowa to this particular confrontation in an engineering building in a university that most of the galaxy had never heard of and never would. Observer Kelth, whose name in his native language roughly translated to "the one who watches and judges your poor life choices," had been monitoring Oak Ridge University for 6 months. He had 17 eyes arranged in a pattern across his upper torso that humans would have found disturbing and his own species considered barely adequate. Currently, 14 of those eyes were focused on the hallway scene, while the other 3 were filing preliminary incident reports because Kelth had learned, through painful experience, that humans could turn any situation violent with approximately 0 warning. "Subject Reeves is surrounded," he announced to the observation deck, his voice carrying the resignation of someone who had watched humans do stupid things for far too long. 5 potential hostiles. Isolated location. Multiple witnesses but questionable intervention probability. His colleague, Observer Nim, the one who documents chaos, swiveled 3 of her sensory stalks toward the relevant monitors. Hostility assessment. Elevated body language. Aggressive posturing. The lead male has his chest puffed out like he's attempting to attract a mate, which humans do before violence, for reasons their own scientists can't adequately explain. The confrontation escalated with the kind of predictable momentum that made it depressing. Carter moved closer, his friends forming a loose semicircle that blocked the stairwell exit. The body language shifted from merely threatening to actively hostile. One of the girls, blonde hair and expression suggesting she peaked in high school and was bitterly clinging to that glory, pulled out her phone and started recording. "This is for the internet," she announced, because apparently humiliation had to be crowdsourced now. "Everyone's going to see what happens when you mess with us." Reeves looked at the phone, then at the semicircle, then at the ceiling with the expression of someone silently asking the universe why she couldn't just have one normal day. "You're all aware there are cameras everywhere in this building, right? You're essentially documenting your own assault charge." "Who said anything about assault?" Carter smiled with a kind of confidence that came from never actually facing consequences. "We're just talking. You're the one getting aggressive." It was gaslighting 101, and about as subtle as a brick through a window. The others moved closer, tightening the circle. Reeves's hand moved to her backpack strap, her weight shifting slightly to the balls of her feet. Small adjustments that the aliens recognized as pre-combat preparation, even if the humans surrounding her were too stupid to notice. In the security office, Thomas finally glanced at his monitors, saw what looked like students talking, and went back to his sandwich. The cameras showed everything with perfect clarity. Digital timestamps, high-definition footage, multiple angles, evidence that would make any potential legal case open and shut. In Station Theta 7, alarms began screaming. "Threat level elevated to critical," Kelth announced, his claws dancing across holographic controls. "Recommend immediate intervention protocols." "Denied," came the response from Commander Vex, whose species had a name that humans couldn't pronounce without dislocating their jaws. She looked like someone had tried to make an octopus out of crystals and given up halfway through. "Non-interference protocols remain in effect. We observe, we document. We do not intervene unless extinction-level threat is detected. One human surrounded by 5 hostiles constitutes human social interaction," Vex interrupted, "which is apparently a violent blood sport on this planet. Our directive is clear: no intervention." Kelth's eyes narrowed. Well, 12 of them did. The other 5 were busy maintaining sensor locks. Human Fragility Index suggests potential for serious injury, perhaps lethal if the fall trajectory intersects with structural corners. Back in the hallway, Carter reached out to grab Reeves's arm, which was the kind of spectacularly stupid decision that suggested his brain had been decorative his entire life. She stepped back, her backpack swinging as a counterbalance, and her voice dropped to the kind of calm that preceded either flight or extraordinary violence. "Don't touch me." Or what? It was at this precise moment, 6:51 p.m. and approximately 37 seconds, that every camera in a 30-foot radius simply stopped working. Not gradually, not with the flickering uncertainty of failing electronics. They just stopped. The security feeds showed clear footage, then static, then nothing. The screens went black as if someone had simply unplugged reality. Thomas, who had finally decided to take his job seriously, stared at his monitors in confusion as 6 different camera angles simultaneously died. What the hell? He smacked the side of his display, which had never fixed anything in the history of electronics, but remained humanity's go-to troubleshooting technique. The girl recording on her phone watched her screen freeze, the image pixelating into meaningless noise before the entire device shut down. She frantically pressed buttons. Nothing. The phone had become an expensive paperweight with a cracked screen protector. Every recording device, every phone, every camera, every piece of electronic surveillance within a precisely calculated radius experienced simultaneous catastrophic failure. The probability of this occurring naturally was roughly the same as winning the lottery while being struck by lightning on a Tuesday while riding a unicorn. Which is to say, it didn't happen by accident. In Station Theta 7, the observation deck erupted into controlled chaos. "We've lost visual," Kelth announced, which was obvious to everyone because half the monitors had gone black and the other half were showing error messages in 17 different languages. "How?" Commander Vex demanded, her crystalline tendrils extending in what might have been alarm or might have been her species' equivalent of aggressive gesturing. "Unknown. All surveillance infrastructure in Sector 7B has experienced simultaneous failure. This is..." Kelth paused, checking his readouts with increasing concern. "This is statistically impossible." "Impossible happens daily on this planet," Vex snapped. "Restore visual now." "Working on it. But the interference pattern suggests intentional jamming technology operating at..." He stopped, one of his eyes widening to comical proportions. "Commander, the jamming signature matches collective technology. Someone is using our own equipment against us." In the hallway, Reeves felt the change before she saw it. The quality of light shifted, as if the air itself had become thicker, more substantial. Time didn't slow. That would be physically impossible. But her perception of it changed, like watching a video buffer at the worst possible moment. Carter's hand, reaching for her arm, stopped mid-motion. Not frozen exactly, but moving so slowly that individual muscle twitches became visible. The others around her had the same quality, like actors pausing mid-scene. Their expressions remained hostile, but trapped in amber, unable to progress. Then the shimmer came. It started as a distortion in the air, like heat waves rising from summer asphalt. Except it was October, and the hallway was temperature-controlled. The shimmer intensified, forming a vaguely circular pattern around Reeves, and her engineering brain, the part that stayed analytical even when everything else was screaming, recognized the energy signature as something that absolutely should not exist, according to every physics textbook she had ever suffered through. "Okay," she said to nobody in particular, her voice sounding muffled and distant in the strange atmospheric pressure. "This is new." The transportation effect was instantaneous and completely disorienting. One moment she was in a hallway that smelled like floor cleaner and desperation. The next she was somewhere else. The first thing Reeves noticed was that gravity felt wrong. Not absent, but different, as if someone had adjusted the universal constant down by about 15%. The second thing she noticed was that the floor beneath her boots wasn't concrete, but something that looked crystalline and felt slightly warm, like sun-baked glass. The third thing she noticed was that she was absolutely, definitely, 100% not on Earth anymore. The room, if room was even the right word for a space that seemed to curve in directions that standard Euclidean geometry didn't cover, was enormous. The walls glowed with bioluminescent patterns that might have been decorative, or might have been functional. She couldn't tell. The ceiling stretched upward into darkness that felt intentional rather than simply absent of light. Equipment that she couldn't begin to identify lined what might generously be called workstations, all humming with the kind of energy that made her teeth ache and her hair stand on end from static electricity. And then there were the aliens. Reeves had spent exactly 0 time thinking about whether aliens existed, primarily because she had been too busy trying to pass thermodynamics to worry about extraterrestrial life. But faced with 3 beings that definitely weren't human, her brain did what it always did when confronted with the impossible. It started taking notes. Observer Kelth stood approximately 7 feet tall, if stood was the right word for something with that many eyes and appendages. His skin had the texture of brushed metal, and those 17 eyes were currently staring at her with expressions that ranged from concern to panic, to what might have been bureaucratic horror. Next to him, observer Nim looked like someone had combined a jellyfish with a filing cabinet and given the result sentience and anxiety. Her sensory stalks waved in patterns that Reeves's brain insisted meant something, probably language, possibly distress signals. Behind them both, Commander Vex's crystalline form refracted the bioluminescent light into patterns that would have been beautiful if Reeves wasn't currently processing the fact that she had been abducted by aliens who looked like they were already regretting their life choices. There was a long moment of silence, the kind that stretched awkwardly while everyone present tried to figure out who should speak first. "So," Reeves finally said, because if the universe was going to throw her curveballs, she might as well swing at them. "Either I'm having a stroke or you're aliens. Please tell me I'm having a stroke, because that would be easier to explain to my professors." Kelth's eyes blinked in sequence, which created a wave effect that Reeves found deeply unsettling. "You are not experiencing cardiovascular trauma. You have been temporarily extracted from a hostile situation for your own protection." "Extracted." Reeves repeated the word like she was tasting it. "You mean kidnapped?" "We prefer emergency relocation," Nim offered, her translator rendering her voice as vaguely feminine and deeply apologetic, with benevolent intent. "Right. Benevolent kidnapping. That's definitely a thing." Reeves adjusted her backpack, which she was still wearing because apparently muscle memory persisted even during alien abductions. "And the hostile situation you extracted me from was..." "What, exactly? Some trust fund idiots being dramatic?" "5 hostiles demonstrating clear, aggressive intent," Kelth explained, pulling up holographic displays that showed the hallway seen from angles that definitely shouldn't have been possible. Threat assessment indicated 73% probability of physical violence resulting in injury. Human Fragility Index suggests... "Human Fragility Index?" Reeves interrupted, her tone sharp enough to cut through the translator lag. "What the hell is a Human Fragility Index?" The aliens exchanged glances, or whatever their species did to communicate nonverbal "oh shit, we said too much" energy. Commander Vex stepped forward, her crystalline form refracting light in ways that probably looked commanding to her own species, but just made Reeves vaguely nauseous. "Humanity is monitored by the Collective Observation Initiative due to your species' unusual combination of technological progress and biological vulnerability. Our protocols mandate intervention when extinction-level threats are detected." "And you thought 5 college students constituted an extinction-level threat?" The absurdity of it cut through Reeves's shock, replacing it with irritation. "Have you been watching humans at all? We survive car crashes. We eat things that should kill us. We literally invented extreme sports as entertainment. 5 idiots in a hallway doesn't even register as a Tuesday." More glances. More nonverbal "oh shit" energy. "Your species' survival rate is statistical anomaly. Kelth said carefully. You should not exist. Your homeworld is actively hostile to life. Your biology is inefficient. Your pain tolerance is inexplicable. And yet you persist. We thought you were fragile because logic demands it. Logic clearly hasn't met humans before. Reeves walked toward the nearest workstation, her engineering instincts temporarily overriding her entirely reasonable urge to panic. Is this a quantum processing array? The energy signature is consistent with entangled particle processing. But the configuration is completely different from theoretical Earth models. The alien stared at her. All 17 of Kelth's eyes, all of Nim's sensory stalks, all of Vex's crystalline facets, focused on this human who had been abducted less than 5 minutes ago and was now examining their technology with the casual interest of someone browsing a hardware store. You should be experiencing psychological trauma, Nim said, which came across less as an observation and more as a plea for the universe to make sense again. Oh, I'm going to have a breakdown later, Reeves assured her, running her hand near but carefully not touching the holographic interface. Probably tonight, possibly tomorrow, during my morning shower. But right now, I'm looking at technology that shouldn't exist, on a ship that definitely isn't human-made, after being extracted via what I'm guessing was localized spatial displacement. My emotional breakdown can wait. This is too interesting. In the monitoring station's command center, where dozens of other observers were watching this interaction with increasing alarm, someone made a note in humanity's file. The note read, in translation, "Revise fragility assessment. Humans may be experiencing different form of insanity." Miss Reeves, Commander Vex said, her tone attempting diplomacy and achieving something closer to barely controlled panic. We need to return you to Earth immediately. This extraction was unauthorized. It violates 7 different collective protocols and approximately 43 interstellar laws. 43? Reeves looked up from the workstation. That seems specific. The collective takes unauthorized human contact very seriously. Your species is classified as developing but dangerous. We are not supposed to interfere. And yet here I am. Reeves gestured to herself, to the ship, to the general situation. On your ship, after you interfered. So either your protocols are guidelines rather than rules, or you're all really bad at following instructions. Kelth made a sound that the translator rendered as something between a sigh and a groan. We observed potential harm. Our directive is to prevent human extinction events. We classified the situation as 5 idiots in a hallway. Reeves interrupted again, which was becoming a habit, which I could have handled. Humans have been dealing with bullies since before we figured out fire. We're surprisingly good at conflict resolution, usually by not being where the conflict is. Your conflict resolution primarily involves avoidance? Nim asked, her stalks tilting in what might have been confusion. And occasionally pepper spray, but mostly avoidance. Reeves walked back toward the center of the room, her boots making strange sounds on the crystalline floor. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to return me to Earth, exactly where you took me from, at exactly the time you took me. You're going to restore the cameras so there's a record of what happened, or didn't happen, depending on how you want to play this. And then you're going to revise your human fragility index, because clearly your data is outdated. We cannot simply return you, Vex protested. There are protocols, procedures, medical scans to ensure you haven't been contaminated by... Contaminated by what? Alien cooties? Reeves's patience, already strained by a long day and sudden abduction, had officially run out. I've been on your ship for maybe 6 minutes. Unless your technology's leaking radiation, Is it leaking radiation? No, Kelth said quickly. All safety measures are. Then I'm fine. I've probably been exposed to more weird stuff in the engineering lab than anything on this ship. Do you know what we keep in the chemical storage closet? Because I don't think our professors do either, and I'm pretty sure some of it violates the Geneva Convention. The aliens consulted with each other in their native languages, which created a sound pattern like wind chimes having an argument with a synthesizer. Reeves waited, her arms crossed, her expression suggesting that she had already made her decision about how this was going to end, and was just waiting for them to catch up. Finally, Vex turned back to her. We will return you, but you must understand. You cannot tell anyone about this encounter. Humanity is not ready for confirmed extraterrestrial contact. The psychological impact alone could what? Make us act weird? Reeves laughed, sharp and incredulous. Have you met humans? We're already weird. We elected leaders based on hair quality and sound bites. We created social media and then acted surprised when it made everyone miserable. We're literally heating our own planet to uninhabitable temperatures and just continuing to do it while complaining about the weather. Aliens existing is honestly not even in the top 10 strangest things happening on Earth right now. Nevertheless, Vex insisted, you cannot speak of this. Who would believe me anyway? Reeves pointed out. If I tell people I was abducted by aliens who thought college bullies were an extinction-level threat, they'll assume I had a breakdown from stress, which, given my academic schedule, would be totally reasonable. More consultation, more musical arguing. We will return you, Kelth finally said. 8 minutes and 40 seconds after extraction. Sufficient time for your attackers to become confused, insufficient time for major incident escalation. We will restore camera functionality and create the impression of technical malfunction. And my phone? Will function normally with no memory of the interruption. Smooth. Reeves adjusted her backpack again, a nervous habit she hadn't even realized she had. One question before you send me back. Why humans? Why monitor us so closely? There have to be other developing species out there. The aliens exchanged what Reeves was beginning to recognize as their version of uncomfortable looks. Because you terrify us, Nim said quietly. Your species should not exist, should not have survived, should not have reached space. You are biologically improbable, socially chaotic, and technologically reckless. You create art about your own extinction and call it entertainment. You voluntarily consume ethanol as a recreational poison. You launched primitive spacecraft with barely functional computers and called it progress. Every predictive model we have says humanity should have destroyed itself a century ago. And yet, here you are, still surviving out of what appears to be pure spite and caffeine. Reeves stared at her for a long moment, then started laughing. Really laughing, the kind that came from genuine amusement rather than politeness. You're monitoring us because we're an anomaly, she said when she could breathe again. We're the universe's error message, the exception that proves the rule. That's amazing. That's the most human thing I've ever heard, and I didn't even know it until aliens told me. It is not amusing, Vex said sternly. It is concerning. Humanity represents an unpredictable variable in galactic stability. Everything about humans is an unpredictable variable. That's kind of our whole deal. Reeves looked around the ship one more time, memorizing details that she would never be able to share, but would definitely never forget. All right, send me back. I've got a circuit design assignment due tomorrow, and I'm not letting alien abduction be my excuse for late submission. The transportation preparation took approximately 90 seconds, which involved a lot of technical discussion in languages Reeves couldn't understand, and equipment adjustments that looked impressive, but could have been complete theater for all she knew. They positioned her in the center of what appeared to be the same spatial displacement device that had extracted her, though reversed. "One more thing," Kelth said as the equipment began to hum. "Your file has been flagged, updated with new behavioral data. Future monitoring protocols will be adjusted." "My file?" Reeves's eyebrows rose. "You have a file on me specifically?" "We have files on all humans of interest. Yours was tagged after you published that open-source code that disrupted 17 commercial ventures and accidentally improved encryption protocols for 3 major governments. That was an accident. I was just trying to— Wait, how do you know about that?" The shimmer started again, the same heatwave distortion that had brought her here. "We monitor everything, Miss Reeves," Vex said, her voice taking on an almost amused quality. "Welcome to being observed." The displacement effect was just as disorienting in reverse. Reality stretched, compressed, folded in on itself in ways that Reeves's brain categorically refused to process as anything other than weird and bad. Then, with a sensation like being dropped into cold water, she was back. The hallway, Maxwell Hall, 6:51 p.m. and approximately 8 minutes and 43 seconds after her extraction. The autumn light through the windows had barely shifted. The floor cleaner smell reasserted itself. Gravity returned to its normal, Earth-standard pull, and Carter was stumbling backward, his expression shifting from aggressive confidence to complete confusion. "What the— Where did you—" He looked around, his friends equally baffled. "You were right here." "I've been right here the whole time," Reeves said calmly, though her hands were shaking slightly in her pockets. "You were the ones acting weird." The girl with the phone was frantically trying to restart it, pressing buttons with increasing desperation. "My phone died. It just completely died." "Cheap electronics," Reeves offered helpfully. "You should probably back up your data more frequently." In the security office, Thomas was staring at his monitors as they flickered back to life, showing the hallway scene exactly as it had been. 5 students surrounding one, everyone looking confused, no violence, no incident. The timestamp showed an 8-minute gap of pure static, which would go into his incident report as equipment malfunction, cause unknown, no injuries reported. Carter and his friends, faced with a situation that made 0 sense and a target who had apparently teleported or something equally impossible, made the very human decision to just leave. They backed away, muttering about glitches and weird shit, their threat displays abandoned in favor of confused retreat. Whatever intimidation they had planned couldn't survive the fundamental weirdness of what had just not happened. Reeves waited until they were gone, then let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands were still shaking. Her heart was racing. The analytical part of her brain was screaming about impossible physics and spatial displacement and technologies that shouldn't exist. The rest of her brain was just trying to process the fact that she had been abducted by aliens who thought humans were terrifying accidents of evolution. She made it back to her dorm room on autopilot, her backpack still heavy with textbooks, her phone showing no signs of the interruption except for a slight gap in the timestamp that could easily be explained as clock drift. She sat on her bed, stared at the ceiling, and waited for the promised breakdown. It didn't come immediately. Instead, her brain kept circling back to the ship, the technology, the expressions on those alien faces when she had called them out for their outdated assumptions. They had been monitoring Earth for centuries and still didn't understand humans. still classified them as fragile when humans survived car crashes for fun and called it learning to drive. She pulled out her laptop, opened a blank document, and started writing. Not about the abduction. That would be insane, and she had no proof anyway. But about spatial displacement theory, about the energy signatures she had seen, about the quantum processing arrays that had hummed with impossible efficiency. She wrote it as fiction, as speculation, as the kind of creative thought experiment that engineering students sometimes did when regular homework wasn't weird enough. If anyone ever asked, she could say it was inspired by too much coffee and not enough sleep. Which was technically true, just missing the part about alien intervention. 342,000 miles away, in Station Theta 7, Observer Kelth was updating Mira Reeves's file with extensive new data. Behavioral assessment. Resilient, analytical, demonstrates humor under stress, shows curiosity rather than fear when confronted with unknown situations. Threat classification. Upgraded from fragile to concerning. Recommendation. Continued monitoring, but with increased distance and revised intervention protocols. Commander Vex reviewed the report, her crystalline form casting rainbow patterns across the command deck. What have we learned from this incident? That our human fragility assessments were based on incomplete data, Kelth said carefully, and that intervention may cause more complications than observation. And that humans are somehow more terrifying up close than at a distance. Vex made a sound that might have been agreement, or might have been her species' equivalent of exhausted laughter. Update the protocols. All stations. Humans are to be observed, not assisted, unless facing actual extinction-level events. And even then, check twice, because they might have it handled. The updated protocols went out across the collective network within hours. 42 civilizations received the message simultaneously. The basic content, stripped of all bureaucratic language and translated into simple terms, boiled down to, humans are weird. They might be fragile. They might be terrifying. We're not sure anymore. Maintain distance. Observe carefully. Do not assume anything. On Earth, Mira Reeves finished her circuit design assignment at 3 a.m., fueled by coffee and the lingering adrenaline of the strangest day of her life. She submitted it through the university portal, closed her laptop, and finally allowed herself the breakdown she had promised herself hours ago. It lasted approximately 10 minutes and consisted primarily of laughing until she cried, then crying until she laughed again, then staring at her ceiling and whisper shouting, "I met aliens, and they think we're scary." Until her roommate banged on the wall and told her to shut up. She fell asleep with her engineering textbook open to a chapter on theoretical physics, her phone charging on her nightstand, completely unaware that her file in an alien database had just been flagged as requires additional observation and potentially dangerous in ways we don't fully understand. The universe continued spinning. Earth continued its orbit. Humans continued being weird, resilient, impossible creatures who survived through spite and caffeine. And somewhere in the darkness between worlds, aliens watched and wondered how natural selection had managed to produce something so biologically improbable, so technologically reckless, and so absolutely terrifying when examined up close. The galaxy's cosmic joke was apparently on them. Humanity wasn't fragile. Humanity was just really, really good at making everyone think they should be. And that, as it turned out, was the scariest thing of all.